Hola, it's me, Robert Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. This is New Mexico History in 10 minutes. If we could get into a time machine and go back to New Mexico in the early 1700s, we'd see that this was a very dangerous place to be. The Spaniards and the Pueblo people had to develop a sense of coexistence to protect each other from groups of native peoples that were coming in from the south, from the north, from the east, from all directions. The Comanches, Apaches, Navajos, Kiowa, Ute. These were fierce warrior people who were also vying for resources, animals, food. It was a very tough place to be, and that's how it was for about 100 years, more or less, from 1700 to roughly 1800. There would be periods of peace, but mainly New Mexico was under siege, so it was a very tough place to live. Now, we were connected to the south, to colonial Mexico, by the Camino Real that brought people, ideas, food, goods, and New Mexico contributed to the economy to the south by shipping piñon, pine nuts, animal skins, hides, corn, blankets made by native peoples, and the Hispanic people had started to develop weaving as well. There's that back and forth cultural exchange going on. Obrajes were established here. These are like sweatshops where poor people and natives would work to create goods to contribute to the economy. But essentially, it was a very dangerous place to live. And what started to happen was these battles that would happen between these different groups. Again, the Puebloan people and the Hispano, the Hispanic people, were united more or less. However, what would happen was these groups out in the llanos, out in the plains, the Comanche, Apache, Navajo, they would raid other native groups and bring women and children to places like Taos or Santa Fe. There would be trade fairs. There would be what would you call it? A truce where they would stop fighting in order to exchange goods, et cetera, et cetera. And the other things would happen, rolls in the hay, you might say, between the different groups, and these grass babies would come 9 months later, little mixed blood babies. But there developed an exchange that's created a new kind of people in New Mexico. These native folks would bring these captives, cautivos, and try to sell them to the Spanish settlers. And under the Spanish system, it was illegal to buy or sell human beings. So not being able to take care of these extra mouths, these women and children, they would be killed on the spot by these native warriors. This was a traumatic thing. So the governor in this early 1700s period came up with an idea, the rescate, a rescue or ransom, where they would pay off the warriors for these women and children, bring them into the Hispanic communities, and put them in Hispanic homes as servants. These folks then would have to Hispanicize and Christianize and Catholicize and essentially try to turn these native folks into Hispanic people, assimilate them, if you will. Well, it didn't always go as planned, and essentially these folks were compelled to do this. They were never returned to their nomadic native communities, and it was a form of servitude, slavery, different from what you had in the South, in the British colonies in North America, and then the United States. But still, nonetheless, it was a form of slavery and servitude, and it's something that we have in our past. These folks were called Genízaros. That means janissary or auxiliary troop, essentially. The Ottoman Turks in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 1400s, 1500s, they would capture Christian children and take the boys, train them as soldiers and fighters, and then put them in the front line when they would go to battle. That's the idea you had with the Genízaros. The first time we hear this term Genízaro in New Mexico was when Vargas used it to describe certain Native Americans, probably heavily Hispanicized. But also, later on, we hear about the Genízaros in 1733 when a group of these folks, they don't stay in the Hispanic families. Eventually, they are set free to live in their own communities or amongst the Hispanics. We see in the 1750 census in Taos and other places a section where Genízaros are listed. But 1733 near Sandia Pueblo, some Genízaros petitioned to establish their own community and get a land grant, but they were turned down. But what we really start to see them come into their own in the 1750s when a Spanish governor at that time, Tomás Vélez Cachupin, he starts to establish Genízaro and mixed blood communities at Abiquiu, Belén in the south, Truchas, Las Trampas. He gets these folks, their excess population in places like Taos and Santa Fe and Albuquerque, and he establishes these towns as buffers to protect the Spanish settler population and the pueblos from marauding and warring Comanche, Apache, Navajo, Kiowa, Ute, Indian warriors. So this is happening in the 1750s, and these folks are a very unique aspect of New Mexico, not just our caste or biological population, but also culturally, because they are also bringing their cultural attributes from their native communities to New Mexico to blend with Pueblo people who they interact with and Hispanic people. And they're making contributions in language, in diet, and how we speak, how we live, and they are part of us. And we'll see that eventually these folks will marry into Pueblo communities, but they also marry into and live in Hispanic communities and with each other. So I want you to think about that, because in New Mexico, we have a very complicated history, and sometimes we have that old idea that there's Spanish people, Pueblo people, and of course, Anglo people. Well, it's so much more complicated than that. New Mexico was part of colonial Mexico. We were part of the greater Spanish Empire. And so what we start to see in the 1700s is this blending of peoples, and we'll see there's a lot of superstition that starts to come back and forth. I'm going to be talking later about witchcraft and sorcery, brujeria y hechicería. These are very, very strong and vibrant cultural currents in New Mexico, and they have roots in Spain, they have roots in Mexico, and clearly they have Puebloan and Genízaro influences as well. So I'll be talking about that pretty soon. And I also want to talk about the phenomenon of Judaizantes, crypto Jews. So join me in a future episode. I'm Robert Martinez. Take care, be well, and be safe. Bye.